So second question is, what is the difference between internal tables and transparent tables? How can I access transparent tables? So what's the usage? So let's start with a difference between internal and transparent table, okay? So let me share the whole screen, and I will tell you what to focus on. Okay, so here on the left side, here is something in a Slovak language. Just ignore that. But what I wanted to show you is the picture from the very first module. So I want you to understand the principle all behind. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. So this is the three-tier architecture that you are probably aware of already, right? Yeah, so let me just quickly walk you through that. So there we have database server. There's just one database, one central database within every database SAP system. And there are several application servers where all the programs are running and they are accessing the database, okay? And you can access everything, like all the application servers, through one presentation layer, which is basically SAP GUI or Java GUI, depending if you are on the Mac or Windows, or maybe if you are on a browser, so you can access it via web IDE and stuff like that. So you can get a browser where you can browse the SAP stuff. Okay. And these browsers, they are connecting to the servers, application servers. Okay, so when there is a question like what is the difference between database, what is between a standard database table or transparent table and internal table. So transparent tables are the tables that are stored on the database table. Okay, so so if I go to transaction, let me just open up a new session. So when I go to transaction SE11 and search for any database table ZLRDDIC store, let's say. So what I'm doing right now, I'm viewing, or this is basically the database table that is stored right here on the database server, okay? So all the content, all the things that are inside of this database server, or even the declarations are stored on the database server. Kind of, because there are some technical things in behind where some things are stored on the application server, but principle is like this, okay? All the database tables are, or those transparent tables are stored on the database server. That is one thing. However, internal table, any time that you create internal table, like let's say like this from this help library program, where we are declaring GT book standard, GT book standard, non-unique, unique key, and blah blah blah, all that internal tables that we will get more into in short time, are created in the runtime of the program on application server. Because when we create our programs and when we press F8, suddenly your program starts running on the application server, okay? And what happens is that when we declare all the internal tables, all the variables, even the field symbols, everything that is declared in a program is being created in a memory of the program. Basically, you can imagine that technically it's in a RAM, okay? So if you have on your Mac, I don't know, 16 gigabytes of RAM, so on these application servers, there are usually at least 16 or much more gigabytes of RAM. Okay, so this is when your program runs, this is being created in your RAM of the program. Okay, so usually when something runs in RAM, so when you are buying computer, or at least myself, I'm taking a look at how much RAM that my PC is having, or even smartphone. The reason why is because RAMs are fast. Okay, so you don't need to wait until it's being loaded or booted from the hard drive. No, so when it's in RAM, it's fast. Okay, so and I'm getting to the point. where there is a like what is the difference between transparent table and internal table is that all the data on the transparent or in the database tables are stored on a database server. That's even in the name of database server. So those database tables are holding the data that we need. Okay. However, internal tables, they don't hold any data until we fill them with some data on the application server in our program. So whenever we do select, it's not here. So whenever we do select into GT DD02L or any GT test internal table, and we select data from the database, it gets loaded from the database to the application server. Okay, so temporarily we are playing with the data on the application server. And there can be a logical question. Okay, so why we need to use internal tables? Why we cannot directly change the data or play with data on a database server? And the answer is because database server is only one. And we can have multiple application servers. So when let's say when application server is fully loaded, like a RAM is 100% full, so suddenly our application server is getting slow because it doesn't have sufficient hardware and so on. So then what is the procedure? Standard procedure in SAP is that admin is adding a new application server. And then you suddenly have more RAM, more CPU, and so on. However, this is something that we cannot do with database server. We cannot add new database server. We can have just one. So the reason why we are moving data from database server to the application server using select into internal table is because we want to save the resources on the database. So the arrows that are grayed and kind of crossed away, what I want to say by this is that instead of instead of calling the database anytime you are thinking about, we just need to think about, okay, what we need to do in order to make sure that database server is not full or filled with our requests. Okay, so our job as programmers is to not use many selects or use unnecessarily use database and move the logic to the application server. To answer the question, what is different between database table and internal table? Database table is stored on the database. It holds the data permanently. It stores the data. Internal table is holding the data only during the program runtime, so that we can play around with the data and then put it back to the database. It was kind of the long version of the answer, but let me ask you if I didn't confuse you, or was it or any question?
No, it's quite clear now. So we move it to application server logic to get faster response and
yeah,
it's quite easier to access and faster.
Exactly. So it's super fast when we are playing around with the data on the application server. Then if we'll be always putting getting requests on the database, putting back and stuff like that. So when I was talking about select and select, this is one statement that is being widely used still in SAP programs. And those are the cycles in ABAP programs that are really slowing down either database plus your programs, because it's super slow to each and every time access the database. Okay, so yeah, so that's why you don't even see select and select inside of our training program. It is because just it's bad programming habit to use something like this because it's super slow. Okay. Even though it is possible, yeah, it is possible to do that. SAP will not tell you it's not allowed, but you need to know what you are doing. So
what's the consequences?
Yeah, And we never, like I never use select and select because it is not necessary. You can always do it in a better way. So this is kind of the long answer to this. And also, if we make sure that we don't flood the database server with our requests, it also influences other people, because there are hundreds of users connected to the SAP system, and if such programs as ours that would flood the database with unnecessary requests, suddenly the database server slows down, and all the maybe you have experienced that you clicked on some transaction and you just waited for, I don't know, minute until something opens up. So that's a reason why, is because there are running the programs which are in the background that are slowing down the database many times unnecessarily. And yeah, and this is what we are trying to avoid. That's why we are not talking only about the functionality. We are also talking about the readability, maintainability, supportability. Along in there inside, there is also the performance optimization. So like this. Okay. A long way to answer this, but hopefully it makes sense. I want you really to understand what's this. Okay. So
yes, it's a perfect explanation. Yeah, that's much easier for me now to locate and to see
understand
where
the
I am
principle behind.
really where I really am in the program.
Yeah, perfect. So when I take a look at your question,
but it's not always easy to access the data, or to when we are in the application logic, it's fine to call maybe SE16N, for example, but it doesn't work for database tables. Huh?
Vice versa. It works for database tables, like in SE16 or SE16N, you
or not that way.
You access the database table or transparent table. Okay, so whenever we go to say data dictionary and I press this button, content, basically we get into SE16, and when I press F8, this content is basically the content from the database table.
Yeah.
So this is the database. So it's easier for user to imagine of what the database table is when you can see the data, when you can see the definition of the database table. So you can see here are the fields and so on. However, internal tables are kind of more imaginary, I would say, because you declare them in the program. So when I click here to our Help Library program, and I go to the declaration part, so you suddenly see GT book standard type standard table of TS book, okay? And then you need to know that this TS book is a structure, type of structure. When you double click on that, okay, so you go here, so you see this is the structure of that internal table. So this is the definition written directly in the code, in the program. So instead of that visual way, you need to kind of understand more the programming behind on how internal table looks like. And of course, you cannot see the data of the internal table because in a program, when we are creating and programming the whole program, then you don't see any data. You can see the data only if you run the program. Let's say you go to debugger, so then you can suddenly see what's
in the
in
debugger.
there. Yeah. So this is the difference between looking at data between internal table and the database table. Okay. So
Okay.
like this. Let me go to your question. So how can I access transparent tables? So the answer is SE11, SE16. What's the usage of transparent tables mainly? So as I said, the usage of transparent tables are to store the data permanently.
The core data on database
Yeah, exactly, on the database. So it's right
server.
here. Okay, perfect. There are also quite a lot of tables which I cannot access with SE16. So
Yes,
SE16N. So go ahead. Probably you meant something by this.
we already discussed.
Okay. So then if we already discussed that, so let me just tell you one point to SE16N. I'm not sure about right now how SE16N is still being used, because quite some time ago SAP has decided to not support this transaction anymore, because it is so dangerous transaction that yeah, like you need to know what you are doing when changing the data on the database level. So yeah, so many times you don't even have the authorizations for this transaction. So if you do, that's fine. But
it's not
in many
for
companies,
the users. It's just for all business analysts to
technical guys
to check the data. Yeah.
And yeah, SE16 for checking the data, there is a transaction SE16 to be for using. SE16N is kind of the mix between SM30 and SE16, okay? Because in SE16 you can usually look for the data. In SM30, which is the database maintenance, is where you maintain the data. And SE16 is something in between, where you can take a look at data and even change the data in there. So that's
So it's
why
better to use SE16.
Depends on what you need. When you say that you have access to SE16N, just use it. You will just use one transaction for both functionalities, for looking onto data and also the changing if it's possible. SM30 is really for maintaining the data. For me, sometimes it's kind of in not user-friendly way, but it depends. It depends. So I just wanted to know that you know the difference between SE16N, SE16, and SM30. So that's what it is. Are there other table types as well? So I'm not sure what you mean, but probably if there is different, if there are any other tables instead of database tables and internal tables. So if
Yes,
this is the question,
they exist or no?
No, so there are no other tables like this.
Because it depends on our architecture.
Yeah. So basically, yeah, there are just two tables, like one of the database server and the on the application server as well, internal tables. Like this. Okay. Question. Okay. No. I don't want to confuse you anymore. Further. Okay. So
ask if you like.
I'm sorry.
Ask if you like.
Have you coded in sometimes in any other programming language?
Just in C.
In C. Okay, so in C there are there arrays?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So then that is good that I asked. So in C there are arrays, and if you can imagine that array, if you are using that and you know how to use that in C, so you can imagine arrays as internal tables in SAP. Okay, it's a very similar concept, and basically this is the parallel that we can use for this. Okay, so in array you never expect to have the data in array before like to store the permanent data. You know that in array you put their data during the program runtime and tweak it or use it for whatever thing, and then maybe to store it back or whatever. Okay, so this is kind of the concept that SAP is coming with. As internal tables are kind of arrays in other programming language. Okay, so those are all the questions about the internal tables, transparent tables, all the things that I see in your in our chat. Is there anything further that you